Hello and welcome to our web chat on how can corporate treasurers use cryptocurrencies. Today we're joined by Hayden Jones, founder and MD of Blockchain Hub, a consultancy providing executive education and strategic support for organizations looking to explore blockchain and digital currencies. Today we'll be discussing the main drivers in using cryptocurrencies effectively. But first, we need to get a perspective on distributed ledger technology. Hayden, what is the problem? Why do we need to reframe it?
It's a topic and it's a phrase that I don't typically use. There's a reason for that, which I'll go into. I think the challenge first off is to really understand distributed ledger technology. We've actually got to go back to Bitcoin, okay? And Bitcoin has got a stigma attached to it, which creates problems for people because it's been associated with things like Silk Road, it's been associated with terrorism financing and things like online pornography. But Bitcoin is an incredibly clever concept. Cryptographers and mathematicians were working for about 20 years in the lead up to the invention, creation, discovery of Bitcoin as a concept in January 2009. A lot of work went into discovering how you could create a secure digital store of value that would persist on an electronic network such as the internet. So the key thing with Bitcoin is that it's a store of value. You can record movements of that value in a ledger and you can pay people with it. And then because it's written in code, you can attach conditions to it. Now from those ideas around Bitcoin, Bitcoin was released into the world and people were interested in it. It was an interesting theoretical concept. In time, people started to ascribe value to it when they created digital currency exchanges, cryptocurrency exchanges. But it was the work that the Bank of England undertook, and they then recognized these ideas around blockchain and distributed ledger. And I think it was at that point, it was largely the word blockchain, which is probably easier to frame than distributed ledger technology. It was the word blockchain and how blockchain was going to change the world that triggered this huge swathe of interest. And then from that, we had the whole idea of distributed ledgers, so shared ledgers sitting across organizations. Now, my perspective on this is that progress has hit the buffers for some sectors. I think financial services is probably the most advanced here, but I think that the challenge with trying to understand distributed ledger technology, which is a term I don't typically use, is to relate it back to normal day-to-day operations within an organization. Bitcoin gives you a framework for storing value, having a ledger, being able to pay people, and also attaching conditions to it. So you can almost forget about Bitcoin, having understood what it gives us as a theoretical framework, and then move that forward and generate ideas around how you can use the theory of Bitcoin to actually increase levels of efficiency within your organization and across a specific sector or multiple sectors.
So those four elements you defined are the essence of the way Bitcoin works.
Bitcoin gives us the ability to collapse those four components. So a really good analogy is what Marconi did with wireless telegraphy. So Marconi worked the history of telegraphy is that we had Morse code tappers who were tapping out messages and then they were being transmitted by cable across countries. And in some cases horses, and then horses would take it to another Morse code shack where people would tap out the message again and then it would be transmitted across cable. What Marconi did was figured out a way of doing away with the cable. And, for some, they thought this was magical, and it was magical at the time in the early part of the 20th century. And what blockchain does, in the same way that Marconi removed the need for wires with radio, wireless telegraphy, what Bitcoin gives us is the theoretical framework to combine the ability to store value, the ability to record that value in a ledger, so our traditional general ledger, the ability to securely move that value from one person to another or one legal entity to another in the form of a payment, and the ability to attach conditions to it. And they could be very simple conditions, such as the ambient temperature of a data center, or whether it was raining in a particular country, or you can create even more complex nested conditions as it relates to a contract. So Bitcoin gives us the theory to collapse the different components of the commercial interface effectively. So the interface, the contractual interface that sits between customer and supplier.
Why do you say Bitcoin is the great in theory? What's wrong with it?
Well, there's a number of things that are wrong with it. I think the first is the fact that we don't know who invented it. I think the NSA do have some perspectives on who the originator of the idea is, but it's an open source protocol. Okay, so developers around the world have worked on that protocol, and what you see are factions that develop within those developer communities, and they argue. And we end up with crazy situations where, in the same way that we have a Windows upgrade, we also have Bitcoin upgrades. So we have different versions of Bitcoin protocols, which are called forks. And most recently, we had a fork in the Bitcoin chain, Bitcoin blockchain, which gave rise to a second version of Bitcoin. So we had almost like a brother currency for Bitcoin. And that was triggered by the difference of opinion within the Bitcoin communities. So that's one of the, I think the challenge, that the lack of formal governance and the ability to actually point to a single governing body that is underpinned by an acknowledged responsible authority, I think is makes it questionable. On the plus side, I mean, it has a secure, very secure ecosystem that sits around it, which actually does link into fiat infrastructure. You have got the challenge of regulation. So I see that the Japanese authorities have actually legislated now to have Bitcoin accepted as a currency. But it's a good protocol, demonstrates the ability to store value and pay and move that across legal entities.
The framework is there, the theory is there. So what are the other opportunities for the corporate treasurer?
There are two parts to that. I think the first relates to traditional fiat infrastructure, so the traditional payment platforms that we've got currently. From the work that the ideas that the Bank of England presented, we came up with, and I think there's three platforms there. You've got Ripple, SETL, and Corda. And those three platforms essentially focus on three things. One is payment, referenced against traditional general ledger platforms such as Oracle, SAP. It's an interledger payment platform. You've got SETL, and their focus is settlement. So settlement of case of financial services, of the movement of financial instruments, so debt equity. And then you've got Corda, which relates to which is more oriented towards contracts and attaching conditions to the movement of value. Now, the clever thing about those three platforms is that they link to they operate within traditional fiat infrastructure environments. So they're a stepping stone. So into the future adoption of digital currency technology. So from a corporate treasury perspective, I think that it's important there to actually understand what these protocols such as Ripple, SETL, and Corda can offer from an efficiency perspective. Because you're moving transaction volume out, you're moving it onto something which is cheaper and easier to transact with. So there's a big understanding piece there, and then there's very much a proof of concept piece there. And then the second part to this is how we can expand upon this idea of tokenizing the usefulness of an organization, because as I said, you're bringing together payment, you're bringing together ledger, you're bringing together store of value, and you're bringing together conditions. So you can actually tokenize usefulness or utility for an organization.
What the hell does that mean?
Uber is an excellent example. If you think about all the Uber drivers that are out there, and they access, they've got access to an app, gives them the ability to take people from point A to point B. But what you've got there, if you think about the utility of their car, so the usefulness of their car, it's been broken up into hourly block, and they that they will drive the car for a 1 hour period, and they will charge the passenger for the privilege of traveling in their car, and the passenger will pay for that experience in the form of fiat currency. Okay, so a pound or a dollar or a yen, or euro. In the case with a digital token, you can tokenize the usefulness of a platform, whether it be a car or whether it be a cloud storage platform. You can break it up into small units that a consumer can then buy or an enterprise can then buy, but they subsist as single units of value, as well as having conditions attached to them, as well as being, the underpinning ledger is also associated with it. So you can see the movement of a token from consumer to supplier, and they have that then as a record of entry, and it exists. It avoids the need for a contract to sit around it.
Does it also removes the need for some clearing?
Yes, that's absolutely correct, because you're collapsing this whole idea of settlement and payment and reconciliation into one. So it just sits in one place. So if you think about the traditional process of settlement, there will be an order which is placed, which is then confirmed, it's then fulfilled. The order will, if it's physical, it will be delivered. There'll be a payment chit, which is then entered into a system, which then triggers a payment, which then moves across another ledger, which then the bank receives, and eventually the bank may move through several other tiers of bank before the recipient actually receives value. So there are multiple steps in the order life cycle, whether that be for ordering a pencil or a big box of pencils, or whether it be for settling a debt instrument. The whole idea of this digital currency technology is that it brings all of that together in one place, and it creates these secure digital events that, as I said, store value. They can be recorded on a ledger, they can be moved, so they can be transferred to other people, and you can attach conditions to them. And this ability to attach conditions means that you can then link that to service provision. So whether that be accessing a cloud storage platform, or whether it be accessing an Uber car, for example.
Okay, so I'm a corporate treasurer and I understand the theory, and a lot of the corporate treasurers are being pushed by both their bankers and their IT guys to really consider the cryptocurrencies and the distributed ledger technology. But where do I use it? What do I do?
Okay, so I was having this conversation last night with an organisation, and we were debating as to whether an organisation should start accepting Bitcoin, which I think is an interesting idea. And interestingly, this week, I think it's Michelle Moan has launched an initiative whereby you can actually buy flats for Bitcoin in Dubai, which is great. It gives the currency profile. But the challenge there is that if an organization just sort of unilaterally said, well, we're going to start to accept Bitcoin, it causes multiple issues. And actually it's going to, it gives you some curb appeal because you're you're now a digital cryptocurrency organization. But the reality is that first of all, you're going to have a hedging issue because you're then exposed to FX risk because you've got to sell it across into dollar, sterling, or euro, whatever. And that's additional cost. And the management of Bitcoin as a currency requires some expertise because it's not like sterling. You've got to secure it in particular types of wallets, hardware wallets or software wallets. So sort of a unilateral statement that we're going to start accepting Bitcoin or Litecoin or Ether doesn't make sense. It might make sense if part of the cost base is in Bitcoin, and actually they do need a Bitcoin stream, but a unilateral sort of statement, we're going to start accepting Bitcoin, doesn't make sense. What does make sense is to start to understand the theory of digital currencies. And then 3 areas there of interest. I think the first is around settlement, the second is around taking friction out of the links in the supply chain, and the third then is this whole idea of tokenization and investment.
That's all been very interesting and thought-provoking, and I can see some real opportunities if the Corporate Treasury Department is prepared to focus enough. But what's the nature of the future of this type of cryptocurrency-based trading, business. What are good examples of what's going on?
There's about 900 digital currencies out there. Everybody thinks it's just Bitcoin, but we're heading towards 1,000 as it stands. And each of those protocols has got a specific function. A good example is cloud storage. And in cloud storage, you have coins now that are emerging whereby, so if you think about accessing a traditional cloud storage service, so you're storing data in a data center, you would have a contract, you'd have a license, obviously you'd pay, you'd move the data across, you have some relationship management, you have a supplier, all of that kind of stuff. Now these new protocols, these cloud storage protocols, what they allow you to do is to buy a little token, or buy 1,000 of them or 10,000 of them, and that gives you the ability to store data. So you don't need a license anymore, you don't need to use Fiat infrastructure anymore. And these tokens, they're tradable, and the value goes up and goes down based on their attractiveness in the marketplace. So that technology is becoming it's already in the marketplace. Some of it's in beta phase, but it's very much there, and we expect to see a greater adoption of that.
You mentioned there's no need to have a license. What does that mean? You can store information illegally?
No, you would in a supplier customer relationship where you're storing your data, or you've asked for your data to be stored on somebody else's platform. Inevitably, you will have some form of client or customer end that will need a license, the ability for that to subsist on your platform. So what you're doing is you're replacing this whole idea of the license to use software that allows you to store, with the idea actually I buy it on an on-demand basis. I buy the token, I put it in the slot, and it gives me that whole ability to leverage that service. And it's just this idea of collapsing, because actually the license is just a contract. And what you've done is you've collapsed those terms and conditions into a digital event.
This type of technology just blows your mind. This is fantastic. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, Jack. Thank you very much indeed.